it is perhaps appropriate that in the same week as Senator McAleese published his report into the Magdalen laundries, that we should stand here and have debate about another issue so central to the lives of women in this country that has for so long been blighted by our tendency towards introversion, our tendency towards religious moralizing, our tendency to lay, or rather lag, behind much of the rest of the world, much of the rest of our friends in Europe and abroad. I'm going to talk to you about two main things tonight. Firstly, I want to talk to you about what I think is core to this and what I think the people on the opposition are probably going to bring up largely. The idea of life. The idea of the fetus as a living entity and whether to abort or terminate the fetus, whichever language you prefer, I'm not really picky about that, is tantamount to killing, tantamount to murder. How we don't necessarily think that it is. How I think that that idea comes largely from a religious persuasion, comes largely from a denominational persuasion, and doesn't necessarily hold a lot of weight when we talk about the rights of women. But secondly, I want to talk to you about this idea of Irish exceptionalism. How many on the other side of this debate paint Ireland as some kind of bastion of life, holding out against abortion, holding out against the other kind of evil things that tend to go on in other Western European countries and the United States and Canada. I don't believe that. I believe that the Irish government has dragged its feet consistently. I believe the Irish government has put its head in the sand like the proverbial ostrich, hoping the abortion debate would go away, but it won't. And then some statistics, because that's important. We ground the debate in reality, just as much as we ground it in morality, philosophy, and maybe even a bit of feminism. Let's talk about this idea. Is the fetus, or the zygote, or the unborn child, or whatever terminology you want to use, the same as the toddler? This is an example that pro-life people like to trot out a lot of the time, the trot out a toddler formula. Would you kill an infant child? Probably not. We say that where abortion is legal, such as the United Kingdom, which is probably the best example as it's the closest place and the place where we have the most experience of, there is a 28-week limit to when you can perform abortions. The reason for this is that a fetus before 28 weeks is not a viable entity outside of the pregnant woman. It is not possible for a fetus before the mark of 28 weeks to survive on its own. Now, of course, there is no single definition of when life begins. We're not here to claim that. What I am here to claim is that the idea that comes across a lot of the time from those who oppose all abortion, all terminations for all reasons, is that birth or life begins at conception. We think this is a largely Christian idea. We think the idea of making abortion illegal is also a relatively new one. If we look historically, in the 17th and 18th centuries, terminations or abortions or ending pregnancy before the quickening was commonly advertised and commonly accepted, despite the teachings of certain churches. The illegalization of abortion largely began in the 19th century, a time that we know from our studies of history was full of religious moralization and the religious justification of many things we would now consider to be repressive. Those laws begin then. When we look at when we begin to make abortion more freely available, we look at the UK, European countries, states in America, and of course culminating the Roe versus Wade decision in '73, which said that women in America had an entitlement. They were entitled to abort because they couldn't be forced to carry children to term if they didn't want to do that. If we even look further afield, if we look outside the Christian dynamic, which I think is important, Islam, mainstream Islam, in the majority of sects, believes that a fetus doesn't acquire a soul until 4 months after impregnation. And therefore that termination on the grounds of the life of the mother or the health of the mother before 4 months is justifiable. There are also some Christian denominations in this country and throughout the world who are pro-choice. They may be in a minority, but that belief exists. It is not simple enough to say that this is a black and white issue, that it is or it is not a living entity. I'm not standing up here claiming that it isn't. What I am claiming is that there is dispute. What I am claiming is that many different people believe different things. And there tends to be a sort of absolutism in this case. But because of facts on the ground, it is necessary, I believe, for the Irish state to legislate. Let's look at the idea of Ireland as an exception, because it is. We rank alongside other noble countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia when it comes to women's access to abortion. That is a fact. In fact, we have slightly more restrictive laws than certain Muslim countries for the reasons that I've already told you. But why is it that Ireland has more restrictive laws and is less inclined towards liberal abortion laws and less inclined towards legislation than countries like the UK or Canada or the USA? The reason for this, I believe, is exactly the same reason that the Magdalen laundries were allowed to operate for such a very long time in such terrible circumstances. The reason is that this state has for a long time been under the control of a very repressive, a very socially conservative regime or regime of ideas, which has meant that individuals have been repressed or oppressed, or whatever word you want to use, ending in pressed, suppressed maybe, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Ireland is not, as they would have us believe, a bastion of life. When we talk about countries where abortion is not legal, we often talk about this idea of backstreet abortions and how dangerous they are and how terrible they are. You will find that the incidence of backstreet abortions in Ireland is actually remarkably low, and that's probably something that's going to come up. But the reason the incidence of backstreet abortions in Ireland is remarkably low is because women who want to have abortions only need to travel for a day to England or to Scotland or to anywhere else in Europe to procure abortions. The facts are clear. Between 1980 and 2011, 150,000 women left this country in order to procure abortions. That is something which is shameful. That is something which does not show us that Ireland, without abortion, is the safest country for women to be pregnant. It shows us that the Irish state has consistently failed. The Irish state has dragged its feet. When mandated to legislate for the X case, it prevaricates. The debate we're now having is whether suicidal thoughts are justifiable as medical grounds for a termination. We are 30 to 40 years behind the rest of the developed democratic world in deciding the rights of the woman over her own body. I think that's important. I think it's important that a woman gets to decide whether or not she carries a baby. I think it's important that a woman gets to decide, how much suffering she has to undergo. We think that's important, particularly if the woman becomes pregnant as a result of rape or incest. We think those things should be legislated for in the beginning, but we also think there are wider implications here. We think that women need to have control over their own bodies, because without that, no other rights can flow. Without the ability to control that which is the only thing you possess, your body, how can we hope to make women equal in our society? We think the Irish state has dragged its feet for too long, needs to pull its head out of the ground, and needs to legislate for abortion and legalise it. We beg you to propose.